The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
And you're going to love it.
Okay, let's go.
Well, I will tell you, Greg, it's honestly a pleasure to have you. And what's funny is a lot of my audience has been saying, hey, give us some different topics, maybe do some lighthearted topics, things like that. And so today we're definitely doing a different topic. I don't know if I can say it's lighthearted because we are literally talking about death. But you know what's great is that I've experienced death myself with my father, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But hey, everybody, I've got Greg Barnsdale here, who is an author, among many other things. And I'm not going to refer to him as Dr. Death, but I'm going to call him my death expert. And I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation today. It's definitely off the beaten path of the deep, shallow dive, but I think that's what makes it so great. And ironically, we're going to do a deep, shallow dive into the concept of dying and death, and obviously something that we're all going to experience. And what I'm excited about, Greg, is that, I think everyone's going to come away with this with such a better understanding of that process because of you. So, hey man, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ray. I appreciate the opportunity to share my message. I truly do think it's an important one that a lot of people need to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what is that message? Maybe start by giving us your background a little bit and then give us your message. What do you want people to hear?
Sure. Well, I started out my career back in the 80s as a young funeral director at a high school. I was probably the second or third person out of the high school to even follow in that career. My family had never been in it. I just had this curiosity about it. I wanted to be a helicopter pilot initially, but I didn't have enough physics. So I ended up working in the funeral industry as a licensed funeral director for quite a number of years, and then developed an interest in regards to pre-planning. I was actually part of a pre-planning team that would promote funeral pre-arrangements for the funeral homes that I had worked for, and that evolved as well. And then I left the industry, maintained my funeral director's license, and became a certified financial planner. And it evolved more so into a deep dive, as you say, Ray, into estate planning. So I've struggled with a way to really find an effective way to help a lot of people, and I think I've finally figured it out with a really good book.
Well, that's great. I mean, the estate planning and all that, I know that's really all part of it. What I want to start out talking about is, I mean, as a young guy, that's interesting that you gravitated to, being a funeral director or being in that industry. I mean, what was it that attracted you to that? That's like when I don't go, but when I would take my dad to like a urologist or a proctologist, I'm like, of all the medical fields, why'd you choose that one? And I kind of want to ask you the same question.
Yes, well, it was really just a curiosity. And actually, it was my guidance counselor in grade 12 or 13, that suggested that I consider the role of a funeral director. And I hadn't really considered that before. And then a good buddy of mine ended up working in the local funeral home in a small town that I grew up in. And I would go to visit him. They had an ambulance bay at the back of the funeral home, and it was really just a very unique environment. And then my grandfather died, and I got more deeply involved in the, I guess, to know what was going on. And then I ended up applying to funeral school at Humber College to join the industry.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you've worked at a funeral home. You've never worked at a mortuary. Well, I guess a mortuary, is that the same thing? Is that a different term?
It is. It's just a different term, but up here in Canada, they're called funeral homes, and in the States, they're called mortuaries.
Okay. And then is the mortuary the place where, let's say, they prepare the body? I don't think are cremations done at mortuaries?
Well, here in Canada, the rules changed a number of years ago, and more funeral homes are being built with crematoriums attached. But typically prior to that, they had to be separated. They couldn't be on the same location or in a cemetery, as an example. But now with those changes here in Canada, it's changed the industry immensely. And my understanding of what is going on in the States is somewhat similar. But as I'm sure you and your listeners are well aware, Ray, that there's a lot of people who don't value the traditional funeral anymore, and they're leaning towards cremation, and in some cases, no funeral at all.
Okay, okay. Let's talk about cremation for a second, and then we'll circle back to something else I want to talk about. So with cremation, you had told me when we had our kind of like prep call for this, when everybody thinks cremation, they think fire cremation, and they think, putting them in, I mean, I guess like a giant oven. I am not a fan of cremation. I'm not going to lie to you. We did not get my dad cremated. I don't really care what happens to me, but I definitely am not a fan of doing that to the people that I love. But tell us about, like, there's new ways to cremate now?
Well, there is, yes. There's a new option that's available aside from fire cremation, which has been around for years. And it took our society quite a number of years to actually embrace that. And now it's very, very common all around the world, especially in the UK. But now there's a new option, and it's called water cremation, or alkaline hydrolysis is the technical name. But it's what results is that the body is put into a water chamber, one body at a time, sort of thing, just the same as a fire cremation, and one body at a time is placed in the retort to be cremated. So what the family gets back is basically all of the bone ash from that loved one that had been cremated. So whether it's fire cremation or water cremation, the ashes that are returned to the family are much the same.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So the end product is the same. It's similar between fire cremation and water cremation. So with water cremation, I mean, is it an acid that they're putting in there? Is the water risen to like a ridiculously high temperature? How does water, I guess, dissolve a body?
Well, you can determine this from the name. Alkaline hydrolysis, as I said, is the technical name. So there's an alkaline chemical that is placed in the water, and yes, you're exactly right, Ray. It's pressurized and it's heated up to a relatively high temperature, and that basically what remains is basically the skeleton of the deceased, and that's the same with fire cremation too. We're mostly made up of water. And that's why, whether in the fire cremation process or water cremation process, it basically, what the end result is basically just the skeleton. And that is what is broken down in a machine. It used to be in a machine that typically had large balls in it, like ball bearings that would roll around and crush the individual bones into little pieces about the size of your thumbnail. And that's what the family would get back.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. So are you saying that whether it's fire cremation or water cremation, the ashes that end up, those are a combination of either the water and fire and then some type of secondary process, like with these balls or something?
No, it's basically just the skeleton, the small fragments of the skeleton that the family receive back. As I said, we're mostly made up of water, which basically just evaporates and disappears during this type of process. But the container as well that the person is brought to the crematorium in, that basically just disappears too, because in the high heat with fire cremation, there's really nothing left except for the skeleton of the deceased and the handles of the casket, that sort of thing, but they're all picked up with a magnet and disposed of. So as I said, what the family gets back with the fire cremation or water cremation is really just the broken down skeleton of the deceased.
Got it. Okay. All right.
With water cremation, it's only the body that is placed inside that container. The casket is not, is my understanding.
Okay, got it. Do you know if water cremation exists in the United States? Because I've never heard of it.
I read about it in my book. It's an up and coming technology. I believe it's being embraced not only throughout the States, but certainly here in Canada and in other parts of the world too. It doesn't leave the same type of footprint on the planet, so to speak, with the exhaust from the fire, as you can imagine, with the typical fire cremation. With water cremation, it's much more environment friendly.
Okay, all right. I mean, that would definitely make sense. Do you have any idea from, and this is going to be something I want to get into next, from a cost standpoint, is water cremation more expensive, less expensive than fire cremation?
Well, just the cost of a cremation here in Canada right now, I would say averages, and this is in Canadian dollars, obviously, Ray,
Hmm.
but between $500 and $700 for the cremation fee. My understanding is that water cremation, the fee for that is a little more expensive. So I would assume it would be in the range of maybe $600 to $1,000, roughly.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. Okay, so I do want to talk about this next, and that is, and I experienced this, that's the business of dying. The business of dying, and I'll get very personal here. My dad passed away suddenly. Now, granted, it was at an older age, at 84, but it was a Monday morning. I'll never forget it. I got a call at 7:51 a.m. from my mom, and that's kind of, she never calls me that early. And so, those are calls you definitely don't want to get. And I remember having a really weird feeling when the phone rang and I saw her name, and I was like, wait a minute, why is she calling this early? And so he had passed away, basically in his sleep. And, which is a beautiful way to go, actually. I hope I go that way. So when I got down there, I drove down and obviously spent time with my dad. And then from there, because we had called 911, they had sent like a grief counselor as part of that process. I don't know if they do that in Canada. I don't know if that's just a California thing, but anyway, so very quickly, and obviously you're in the most, I guess, vulnerable emotional position. And I had an incredibly good relationship with my dad, so it was even more. But I'll be honest, like all of a sudden she started telling me. I said, well, what's next? My dad's in the bedroom. What do I need to do? What's the process? And so she said, well, step one is you should call I guess a mortuary or a funeral home or someone, and they need to come and get the body. And
Right.
so she recommended a certain company. And, I'll be honest, man, as emotional as I was like, well, do I have to use these guys? And she said, no, you can use whoever you want. This is just who we recommend. And so, I stepped outside. I spent the next hour and a half actually calling several mortuaries and funeral homes. And I was like, this is actually what my dad would have wanted. Like, I need to treat this as a business right now, because it is a business. This is not a not-for-profit situation. So anyway, long story short with that, I ended up finding a funeral home that, quite frankly, was almost a fifth of the price. They wanted around almost $7,000 to come and pick up my dad's body and then take him to their facility and then put him into cold storage. And then I guess we would figure out the plan from there. And, I ended up getting it done for like 1,200, and I didn't feel bad about that. So like, I want you to maybe talk about, I mean, at the end of the day, like anything else, it's a business, right? So, like, when someone's loved one passes away, do you have any, I guess, tips of how people should treat that, what they should think about, maybe something along those lines?
Yes, yeah, and thanks for sharing that, Ray. I'm sorry to hear it was such a event with your father. Somebody passing away suddenly like that can be a terrible situation to go through, and we all know it, as you referenced at the beginning of this conversation and recording here today. We all have to deal with death while we're living, death of
Sure.
friends and loved ones, etc. And in some cases, we have to take control and actually settle the estate in some cases as an executor, which is a huge, important, and risky role at the same time. But the best case scenario is if the deceased had these types of conversations in advance, long before they died, when
Sure.
time was plentiful, minds were clear, and there wasn't some sort of health issue also in the mix to complicate things, because that's when these decisions could be made in regards to which mortuaries to be used, and does the person not want a funeral? Would they rather have something in a local hall, or would they rather not have any funeral at all? And as I said, more and more people don't want to have something, but as I stress in my book, it can be very important to the survivors, and it certainly was for me when I had gone through this with loved ones who had died, and seen many families go through this. Having some sort of get together can be very helpful, but the key is really just trying to be proactive and talk about these things, about what you want to have happen, long before it does.
No, absolutely. And I mean, again, we hadn't talked about anything. We absolutely had not talked about anything. And so that was I always share with people, it was sudden and we had nothing arranged. You know, I don't know if I could say it was tragic because my dad lived a wonderful life and he lived an extended life to 84. And, that's a good run. But like the folks that, and it's happening a lot these days, there's definitely an uptick in people that seem to be dying suddenly at younger ages, whether it's a 50-year-old person that has a heart attack on a treadmill or something like that. I think a lot of those people also probably have not thought about anything. So those are sudden and tragic. What I think is great about your book, and to be honest, what I think is great about what you're doing is you're kind of causing us to think about it, because we don't if we're at a certain age. And I think it's great that you're advocating for us to think about it. So let's do the ideal situation. Let's take me for example. I don't really have, I mean, I have a revocable living trust set up, and I do have a will and all of that. But let's say somebody doesn't have anything. So give us what you think are the immediate things people should do after listening to this podcast.
Okay. The most important thing I would suggest.
Besides read your book, by the way. Besides read your book. That's step one.
That's certainly what came to mind, because it talks about all these things. And I took so much time, Ray, to create a book that I felt people would read, and it's really starting to get some traction. It's really just a conversation starter, but that kind of comes back to your question: what should people do? Is to have the conversation, to talk to their spouse and their parents about what their parents have planned, or if they've planned anything. One of the most important things that any of us can do as a responsible adult is, regardless of our financial situation or how many kids we may or may not have, or whether we own a business or property outside of our home jurisdiction or whatever, is to have a current and valid will. Because a will is really the only thing at all, Ray, on anywhere that can specify who is to wrap up our life when we die. Is that not an incredibly important thing to have specified somewhere?
No, I think it's absolutely incredibly important. But again, like I said, I think most people, really probably under the age of 70 don't even necessarily think about it. Maybe a lot of folks that obviously have families and kids and all that, they put that in place. But okay, so getting the last will and testament. Absolutely. Is that that's probably part of an entire maybe estates, wills, and trusts package, that you can get either a financial planner like yourself or or a lawyer to put together? Is that kind of how you're recommending?
Well, and keep in mind, Ray, I don't know if I mentioned this to you earlier, but I'm not providing one-on-one advice to anyone anymore. My
Yeah.
plate is full of spreading this general message as far and wide as I can. But yes, and that's why I took so much time in creating that part within the book as well, is to explain to people that this is a huge list of what financial planners can bring to the table and how they can help you with this. And as an example, they often act as a quarterback to bring in the lawyer or accountant to help with whatever that situation, whatever the family situation needs. And everybody's situation is so different. But I also carefully address the point that people, if their situation is very straightforward, They could also get a will online. That's very easy today. And there are a pile of different platforms for a very, very low
Right.
amount of money. People can set up an online will, but there are some very important cautions to that.
Okay. Okay. What are the cautions?
If someone is paying support, such as to a child or an ex-wife, they should be seeing a lawyer, because a standard type of will planning platform won't typically cover off those issues necessarily, and it's not worth taking that chance by trying to save some money on the front end. It could cost more at the back end
Got
after a
it.
death. Got it?
Okay.
So if somebody owns some sort of business ownership or is a partner in a business, they should be seeing a lawyer. If they own property outside of their home jurisdiction, they should be seeing a lawyer. Or if they have any specific requests, such as, if this happens, then I want this to happen. Well, that's more complicated than what a standard typical will planning platform can do. Seeing a lawyer is the best bet.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Okay. Gosh, I wonder how similar or different the laws are in Canada and the United States.
Well, each of the jurisdictions, each of the provinces here in Canada, they're all a little different. They're similar to a degree, and I would imagine in the United States, it's much the same thing. They may differ from state to state, but the will, as an example, is what is used globally by everyone to specify. It's called testamentary rights. We all have that right to specify what we want to have happen when we die. And wills, as I mentioned a brief little story within my book about wills dating back to ancient Greece. They've been around forever and always will be.
Okay. Okay. So the will is really the centerpiece of everything. That's something everybody should have. From there, I know a lot of people have revocable living trusts, and they put their assets inside that trust, and then that trust is, I guess, the information about how that trust is to be designated, that can be included in the will. Okay, so that's a big part of it. I mean, I think that's great advice, first of all, to make sure everybody absolutely has their will in place. One of the other things you had told me previously, which I think is interesting, and I don't know if I was a fan of this or if I wasn't a fan of it, but like the concept of the casket and all that. I mean, we did that process with my dad. I will say the part of that I liked was that, he was dressed up in his favorite suit, and so, he looked like $1,000,000, and we put things inside the casket, picture of my niece and nephew. Gosh, I put some things that I thought would make him laugh. We put a bunch of things inside the casket,
Right.
which I liked. I thought that was a really cool process. And my dad was a scholar, so we put a copy of his 500-page PhD thesis in there. So I thought that was incredibly cool. By the same token, I don't know if in the United States they do this, but I know in other countries, a lot of times they just wrap the body in a shroud, and it's sort of like, I guess, I know there's an expression for it, like earth to earth, or back to Mother Earth, which I think that's incredibly cool. Just nothing. And so the body, decomposes and gives back to the land. You had told me some interesting things about that process. Can you share a little bit there?
Sure. It's basically called a natural burial or a green burial, and it can be less expensive than a traditional funeral. I believe right about now, the average cost of a funeral in the States is about $6,000 or $7,000 US. And again, I stress that in the book as well to give people an idea. Green burials or natural burials don't involve caskets or embalming or any. It's very basic and very plain, but there's an increasing demand for that again because of this whole aspect of people wanting to reduce their global footprint. And I get it. I try to do that all the time with recycling and all kinds of stuff. And there's
Sure.
another thing, you can recycle your body now that we should talk about too, which is a little off.
Yeah.
But or on, I should say, it's directly in this theme. But those again, it comes back to this whole aspect of being aware of what's available, so one can decide proactively, well, yeah, I'd like this, or I'd like this to be done. And that's where having these conversations in advance and starting with the will, because that often leads to all these other things. Like, what do I want my funeral to be? Do I even want a funeral? Do I want a casket? Would I rather recycle myself and have my body turned into basically good quality earth that would help grow trees and things? Because that's now another option too.
So what do you mean recycle yourself? Yeah, and grow into a tree. Help us understand that.
Well, there's I believe more than one company now that offers human recycling, and basically what they do is they take the body wrapped in a biodegradable shroud or sheet without the casket, and it's placed in a container that quickly composts and breaks down the body into soil. Within a very short period of time. And I've just done a little bit of reading on this, but we are all going to hear more and more about this as time goes by.
Oh, that's interesting. So they put you in the ground like a regular burial, but then there's something that's gonna, I guess, decompose your body much quicker.
No, well, actually, it's a capsule.
Oh, it's a
And
capsule.
in this, in the one article that I had read and looking at the pictures, this particular company offered basically a building with all kinds of different capsules that they were holding, where people's deceased were basically being broken down and turned into compostable, biodegradable material, is my understanding. But it's
I
a
mean,
form of
that's
recycling
interesting.
the body.
That's definitely interesting, and it would be interesting that where that happens. I mean, God, that'd be amazing if like a tree came out from that. That's all right. That is definitely, I guess, a little bit of technology in the death industry. I feel like, and honestly, I absolutely will put a link for your book and let people. I'm going to let you tell everyone how to get it and all that. But I really want to thank you just for bringing this to the forefront. And honestly, like I hope this is really an episode unlike anything I've done, because I really want people to have one major takeaway from me, and that is, hey, you got to think about this stuff. You have to think about it for yourself. You have to think about it if you are in charge of, let's say, your parents at this age that we're at. You know, I know those are difficult conversations, but maybe your mom and dad don't want people wearing all black. They want people wearing white. I see a lot of that these days. Maybe they want people in a variety of colors doing a certain thing. So I really want to thank you for kind of bringing this to the forefront for us and having people kind of have this top of mind. I'd love for you to tell everybody where we can get the book, and then really just kind of close it out with any other, I guess, words of wisdom or things you really want people to remember from our conversation.
Okay. One of the major things, the few things that I'm promoting to really capture people's attention with this message, Ray, is this. The process of planning for what we want to have happen actually helps to reduce the stress of aging, which is a vitally important point all on its own. But for survivors who survive us, our children and our family members, etc., they actually will become more emotionally and financially resilient as a part of this process, because more and more people are creating, family meetings to talk about these things. And this is what financial advisors and lawyers are often recommending to really elevate the whole aspect of communication. And when family members are involved in these conversations proactively before a death or something major takes place, like a health crisis, they're much more inclined to understand the reasoning behind why the testator, the will maker, wants to do these things, and they're less inclined to contest the will, as an example, in court. So they're more emotionally and financially resilient. This results in more meaningful legacies instead of a disastrous mess being left behind for the family to clean up. Having a will dictates who's in charge of looking after this, whether it's an individual or a trust company or whatever. And it also often leads to money being donated to charities. So it helps them do more of their good work. And ultimately, this takes a huge burden off the court systems from having to deal with so many unorganized estates, which ultimately helps the economy. It's a huge boost to us all. We just have to lean into this more and get talking about it.
No, that is interesting. I mean, it really does have a ripple effect when there's no thought process going into it, and you do have a sudden tragic or non-tragic death that has had no previous planning, let alone, let's say there's no one even available for that person or that entity. I mean, it's very sad, but obviously a lot of elderly people might not have the right support structures that are even needed to help them plan for it, but then also execute the plan. So anyway, all right. So where can everybody get the book, and where can they find you?
Well, the best way, Ray, is for people to go to my website, donotignoreyourmortality.com. And that's basically tied in with the title of the book here. I know I have it behind me, but this is a little easier to see. But on my website, there are all kinds of links where people can find how to buy the book. But it is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all electronic platforms as well. And it's also available in an ebook version as well.
Oh, that's great. Okay, that's great. Oh, is there an audiobook as well?
There is an audiobook, yes.
Do you narrate it yourself? That's
Yes.
fantastic, man. All right. I'm gonna get a copy for my library, but I might even listen to the audiobook. I'll be on my treadmill getting my steps in, or out for my walks, and I'll be listening to it. But hey, man, we have to pay attention to it. All right, listen, Greg, I really do appreciate it. And I have a feeling there might be a significant amount of questions that come back to me. So if you don't mind, I will reserve the right to bring you back on and maybe do a session where we can answer a bunch of people's questions, and then have you share anything else that you'd like to share.
Yes, and by the way, Ray, I've also come up with a list of what I call probing legacy questions, and I have them here. I can make them available to anyone who's interested. But I came up with this curated list to help make it easier for people to have these conversations. So there's 15. Great. There's 15 basic questions for just kind of introducing this whole concept to parents or whoever, and then there's 15 more advanced questions, but they are very effective.
And is that list available on your website?
Actually, I'm asking people to provide me with their name and email address so I can stay in touch with them, but I will provide it for free, yes. They just have to reach out to me.
Yeah, sounds good. And I'll make sure to put a link for your website so people can go to the website and then connect directly with you, and you guys can do that through email. All right, listen, Greg, really appreciate it. Very, very informative and off the beaten path topic, but I think one that, quite frankly, it is a needed discussion to have. So thank you again, sir. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Ray.
All right, take care.
This episode was brought to you by the new book, Deep Shallow Dive Into You, available now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble in hardcover and paperback. Don't forget to sign up for our new mailing list on our website at deepshallowdive.com.